In 1966, Brian Wilson went into a recording studio with the biggest sum of money anyone had ever been given to go and record a single song in a recording studio. He was in the middle of the sessions for the album Pet Sounds, which was his response to the Beatles' Revolver, Rubber Soul, which had revolutionized the idea of the album and revolutionized the idea of a recording studio as an instrument, of actually creating songs within the recording studio, and this recording studio being vital to the creation of the song. But the Beatles were a band, and they were aided by George Martin. Brian Wilson was a one-man show. Even though he was a member of the Beach Boys, he was the real musical force behind that band. And so, armed with thousands of pounds, he started to pull together one of the greatest tracks in rock music history. That tune became Good Vibrations. Brian Wilson has just died. I just had the news come through very, very suddenly. I think he's actually died literally a few hours ago, and I just saw it come through. It's still not registering on certain websites, so this is very fresh. I've grabbed the camera straight away, and I am about to do a tribute to Brian Wilson, which is troublesome because I have been hard on Brian Wilson on this channel. I have often said that the album Pet Sounds, it has a higher reputation than it deserves. It sort of followed in the wake of the Beatles, and although it is innovative in its use of the studio, it pursues ideas that are really, in a way, musically are derived from the influences of the Beatles, of various other artists, and in a way sort of extend what the Beach Boys were doing musically. A lot of the vocal harmonies, a lot of the sentiments of the songs, a lot of the sort of song structures weren't that different to the sort of hits they were having in the early 60s. And I think it's worth saying that for me, Brian Wilson's real genius is the creation of those early Beach Boys songs. Things like I Get Around and California Girls, and all those incredible pop songs which seem to combine a sort of hedonistic surf music, electric guitar stinging rock and roll with barbershop quartets, beautiful vocal harmonies, and it sums up a certain time, and that is what he's famous for having hit after hit. And I think the fact that he was trained to do these vocal harmonies, and he had a certain idea about harmony and how those things should fit together and how to balance that in the recording studio, it gave him a different idea of how a band should work. The Beach Boys were primarily a vocal group, although they also played all the instruments as well. I mean, Brian Wilson played the bass of the Beach Boys. But by 1964, he'd sort of given up on all that, and he was just working in the studio while the rest of the guys went out and played live. Now, it could be said that it was because the guy was a genius and that he wanted to fulfill, all his time in the studio and to fulfill his creative vision, but it wasn't that, was it? It was because he was suffering with severe mental health issues. Now, this is not uncommon in the music industry, but I think in Brian Wilson's case, he is perhaps one of the most affected by mental health issues of any musician we can think of. Perhaps he suffered more than anybody else. This wasn't just simple depression, sort of the stresses that come from being a creative person or being a sensitive person thrown into the music industry. It seems that Brian Wilson suffered with a form of paranoid schizophrenia. He had a Jesus Christ complex. He heard voices. The voices were terrifying for him. And this was exacerbated by hallucinogenic drug use. It's interesting for me, or actually poetic is probably a better way of describing, that he has died the day after Sly Stone. And those two musicians sort of hold hands across a lot of the music that was going on in the 1960s at that time. And both of them, although they were genius in their early career, were then held back by mental health issues as time went on. Very interesting. So we are always judging these musicians on what they did in the late 60s. The reason I come back to Good Vibrations is I think that Good Vibrations is perhaps one of the greatest songs ever produced by anybody in the history of rock and roll. A lot of the promise, a lot of the innovation, a lot of the excitement that for me is directed at Pet Sounds, although I can hear it there, and it's a very important work in that regard. The fact is that when you put on Good Vibrations, even now, it sounds like it was made yesterday. This is a work of absolute genius, and I haven't talked about it on this channel. So I want to use, the passing of Brian Wilson to really explore Good Vibrations as a tribute to this man, to try and really explain his genius. Good Vibrations could not exist without a recording studio. A band cannot play that. It utilizes at one extreme a theremin to create that, that spooky space sound. And he's also using, wind instruments like ocarinas to create all sorts of different colour. The structure of the tune is very strange. The harmony is very strange. It's very evocative. But for me, the real genius of this tune is the structuring of it. There is a definite verse and chorus, but both the verse and choruses act as a verse and a chorus. Both of those are choruses in effect, and they are both completely different. When we explore Brian Wilson's mental health issues, and then we go and put Good Vibrations on, it's schizophrenic in its character. And what happens on this tune is it embodies two ways of seeing the world, two separate ways. So it opens up and you have the this is all very beautiful, pointillistic. All that is very beautiful, and for me that embodies a songwriting approach which is cerebral. This is the area of music which isn't sort of my forte, really. I'm a musician's musician. I'm interested in music. I don't get so much the Bob Dylans or the Stephen Stills or the songwriters in the world out there, the Bruce Springsteen. I'm much more into the visceral vibe of a record. But this is beautiful music, but it's also cerebral. It's thoughtful. Right? It's thinking about love and the consequences of it. It's deep, it's intellectual, and the music follows that. Right? This is cerebral music. This is music that is embodied in perfection. It's like a perfect little world that he's created. But he doesn't stay there. With a little bit of an announcement on the drum roll, we go into the next section, which is the Good Vibrations section. And here it suddenly starts to pulse. It sounds absolutely futuristic. Even now, it sounds like it's come from another planet. This section is incredible. As we get that, and we get, I'll pick it up, good vibration, but she's giving me excitation. And the vocals start to go, good vibration, but then we get these key changes, good, and all this is going on. But this is purely visceral. It's just the band going, I'll pick it up, good vibrations. And then they invent a word. She's giving me excitations. Is excitations a word? This is purely visceral. The words don't even quite make sense. It sounds clunky, but it's pure joy. I've always felt that the world's divided up into two types of people, especially when it comes to music appreciations. There's those that are to music which is embodied in the first section of Good Vibration, and those that are embodied in the second section. And when you put these together, you have what I have described as a sublime. I believe that the creative act is an act of trying to balance the visceral, the hedonistic, the good vibrations with the cerebral and perfectionism of all so beautiful. It's just so beautiful. And one of the genius things about this is those two belong together. Brian Wilson has perfectly balanced them, and he hasn't perfectly balanced them with his acoustic guitar and the lyrics, and just considering about those limited things, which at the time was the bread and butter of songwriting. No, he has forged this sound in the studio. It's not a product of chord changes. It's not a product of the melody and how it works. It's a product of the sounds and the way those sounds are work together. It's an absolutely work of genius. I've said this for so many years. I was let down by Pet Sounds because I was expecting an album of good vibrations. You can't have an album of good vibrations. We nearly did. He then went on to start working on the album Smile, which he did bring out many years later, but that was after the horse had bolted. Brian Wilson was undone by his mental health issues, and by the time you get to the 70s, he was behaving extremely erratically. And of course, when you're a multi-millionaire, super creative, talented guy with those sort of mental health issues, people come in and around you and exploit you, and he went through all sorts of different methods to try and sort him out. Over the years, he's come back a little bit. He was out, 20 years ago, and managed to get Smile back on the road, came and did that. And he seemed a lot happier in his later years, a lot more balanced. More recently, we've seen him appearing in a wheelchair, and it seems he's succumbed to dementia. Just over the last few years, he seems to have gone downhill rapidly. He's also suffered bereavements more recently. And so I think he's been a little bit cast adrift. I can't help but look at the guy with not just sadness, but also a feeling that creative people have, knowing themselves that how vulnerable you are as a creative person, because to be creative is to be sensitive, and to be able to utilize your sensitive skills and see the world in a different way places you in a place where you do see the world in a different way, and it affects you very deeply. Brian Wilson, when he was younger, was deaf in one ear. He had an illness. I only just read this now, just before I jumped on to do this. And I thought that was very interesting, that this guy that had really created such wonders in the recording studio was deaf in one ear. But it's very interesting because for all the studio trickery he does, he never really explores with the stereo field. But of course in 1966, that's quite a new thing. But what was far more interesting, I found out, is that as a young boy, because he could only hear in one ear, he started to talk out the corner of his mouth like that so that he could hear himself. And this made people think he'd had a stroke. When I first, as a younger man, saw Brian Wilson talking and saw that funny talk, I thought, yeah, this guy's not right. And so he had an otherworldliness in his personality. He seemed to be withdrawn from society, not quite a part of society. And this is all so powerful. There is very few people like him in the music industry. The Syd Barretts, yes, but they're very charismatic. They were little pop stars. Sly Stone was extravagant and overboard, a funky man with his hat on the side, Who else could we put in the same bracket as Brian Wilson? Brian Wilson was awkward. He was quiet. He was withdrawn. He seemed to represent the gawky teenager. And so at the centre of all this sort of hedonist beach sort of loving Beach Boys music in the early 60s was again the antithesis of that. And I think the greatest thing about, for me now, the greatest thing about Pet Sounds, when I go back to that, is the lyrical content and how he's exploring in an almost nostalgic way the collapse of simple romantic love that had been sort of challenged by the freedom and hedonism of the 1960s. He didn't want that. He wanted to return to a simpler time. And so in that conservatism, we then have these futuristic sounds appearing. I think what I'm trying to say is Brian Wilson was a contradiction, and everything that he did was balanced by the opposite. And maybe his creativity combined with a sort of schizophrenic view of the world that he was always trying to balance created the very thing that art resides in, which is the conjunction of those two opposites, of hedonism and perfectionism, of chaos and order, you know, of night and day, of good and evil. All those things are within him, and he seems to have fought his way creatively to get to that at a great cost. So yes, he was born on the 20th of June 1942. If he could have made it another 9 days, he would have got to 83, but he's died at the age of 82. This guy is a giant in 20th century popular music. This is one of the greats. We had one of the greats pass yesterday, and now we've had another great pass today. These people are passing into history. I say every single time. Brian Wilson is now gone. I know, and I think he did well too, with all the sort of drug use and mental health issues, and the fact that he was diabetic, and I don't think he was the healthiest guy. He seemed to do quite well, but that's of course because our time on the earth is set for us and has nothing to do with what we do in terms of health or not. But that's a completely different theory of mine, which I have voiced here, and I've had the strength to voice such a strange opinion. But I do believe that's the case. But I voiced it here because this is a video about Brian Wilson, and this is just the right place. He's spent his time on earth, and now he has passed on. And within that, he has created some of the great popular music of the 20th century. And in Good Vibrations, is it the greatest tune ever written? Is Good Vibrations, is there anything better than that? Can you think of anything in the pantheon of rock music and pop music better than Good Vibrations? Can you think of anything that does as much as that tune? Can you think of any tune that appeals to such a broad demographic and does so much, you know, goes from, you know, the sort of, the beauty, the calm beauty of waves, you know, gently rolling up a beach, to the waves then crashing in and you jumping on that and surfing across. And the thing is that that's what life's about, isn't it? Surfing it's what I'm doing here. I'm trying to get on that wave. I'm trying to get on that wave of me, what I know of Brian Wilson, what I feel about Brian Wilson. I'm trying to jump on that wave and surf right across on the top of it. And hopefully in this 20-minute video, you felt something from it, and I've been able to add something to him dying, not just to come up on here and say, yeah, he was important. You know, I want to do something where somebody comes away and says, oh, that little video was interesting. I got something from that. And the reason I got something from that is because I'm channeling Brian Wilson right now. I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about the music. I can hear it now. Round, round, get around, I get around, round, ooh, I get around. You see what I mean by opposites? Bass, round, round, get around, I get around. Bass descending, and then round, ooh, opposite, I get around, and then they join together. I get around, and when we were off, you know, with these things widening almost like, you know, sunny, hedonistic bark. It's wonderful stuff. It's wonderful stuff. Thank you, Brian. You've done your job. You can now rest easy. The turmoil's over. And I think we should all sit back, stick Good Vibrations on, and remember an absolute genius of music in the 20th century. I didn't know banana clothes to wear. And I did it. Are you hearing it? I'm picking up good vibrations. She's giving me excitations. Good vibrations. Good vibrations. Key change. Up. Good vibrations. Boom. You're hearing it. Think about it. How many musicians have done that we could sit here? We don't have to put the track on. It's in there. It's in there, bolted in. And what's bolted in? The sound. And it represents something, and when you hear it, you can feel the hotness of the sun. You can feel the sprinkle of the sea crashing in. You can see people walking up. You can see people in love. You can see people happy. You can see people enjoying themselves, youthful people enjoying being alive. Thanks for watching this video.